Thank you, Melissa. And Melissa has put a welcome message in the chat area. If you'd like to go take a look at it, it's a reminder for tonight's logistics. Welcome to Setting Students Up for Success, the second installment of our 2022 Howard County Transition Symposium, a four-part webinar series presented monthly from February to May. I am Dawson Robertson, a transition resource for the Howard County Public School System, and I'll be moderating tonight's presentation. We are very excited to offer our simultaneous interpretation for Spanish speakers. We will remain together for a welcome and instruction. Please keep your cameras off and remain muted during the presentation. You may put questions in the chat, and we have shared all the questions you submitted during registration with the speakers. I'd like to introduce our interpreter for this evening, Magdalena Castro Lewis from Luminous here in Howard County. Luminous is a nonprofit organization in Howard County, Maryland that empowers immigrants, refugees, asylees, and other foreign-born individuals by helping them access community resources and opportunities. They provide immigration counseling, interpreting, and translation services, information and referrals, and a variety of workshops. If you would like to access Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe at the bottom center of the screen and then click on Spanish. Once you are on the Spanish channel, you will hear the interpreter at 80% and the presenter at just 20%. Please go ahead and access that channel at this time and let us know if you're having any difficulty. Magda, please let me know when you are ready to proceed. Thank you. Okay, thank you. The Transition Symposium series is presented by the Howard County Transition Outreach Partnership, which includes Accessible Resources for Independence, the Howard County Public School System, the Autism Society of Howard County Recreation and Parks, the ARC of Howard County Department of Community Resources and Services, NAMI of Howard County, and Maryland Works. Each presentation will be recorded and posted along with any other materials on the Howard County Autism Society website, as well as emailed to all registrants. You only need to register one time to receive the logins for all 4 sessions. And while we're here, we will remind folks of the last 2 sessions. On April the 21st, session 3 will be Employment First. It will address the strategies and considerations associated with promoting, building, and supporting acceptance, inclusion, and neurodiversity in the workplace and community. It will involve a featured speaker and panelists again. The 4th and final workshop will be You Can Get SSI Medical Assistance and Go to Work and Live to Tell About It. That will be on May 24th, same time, and Michael Dalto, a benefit consultant, will be our speaker. Okay, tonight's presentation will outline the steps and resources to help transition-age youth with disabilities who are still in school to prepare for the next stage of their lives. A panel discussion will follow with individuals from service agencies, a school system transition specialist, and a parent advocate. The panel members will share their perspectives on the transition process from school to adult life and their insights from assisting youth with transition. Let me introduce the panelists first before we get to our speaker. Kathy Land is here from Service Coordination, where she's a supervisor. Meghan Smallwood is a transition specialist with the Howard County Public School System. And Beth Benavidez is a parent advocate. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Stacey Herman, who is the Assistant Vice President of Neurodiversity and Community Workforce Development at the Kennedy Krieger Institute. Welcome, Stacey.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and to present on setting students up for success with a transition focus. So for this evening, I know that this is a very heavy topic. There's a lot of content and information. So for this initial part, I am going to go through a brief overview of kind of those hot topics and setting yourselves up for success when you're thinking about transition. Then we can get into more detail with the panelists. So save those questions, put them in the chat as you're thinking about it, feel free to do that. And we'll make sure to get to them at the end, and the panel is going to join so we can really bring all of our expertise into the discussion and your questions. I also encourage you to ask questions. This is a safe space to learn and educate. I also encourage, if your son or daughter who is going to be making this transition is in the room around the area, to please have them listen and be part of the conversation as well. This information is important for all of you, the entire family unit or caregivers that are here today, or educators. And then I also encourage you, if there's topics that are not covered in detail, to take notes, because those are questions that you can follow up with your transition coordinators, myself, others on the panel. So please take those notes, as well, as many of these topics could really be their own trainings. So if you could just put in the chat, your name, your role, like who you are as part of this team, is this network. Are you a parent? Are you an individual with a disability? Are you a school transition coordinator, a community member? Just so I kind of know who's in the room with us. So during the presentation today, I'm going to briefly just talk about who am I and what's my role at the organization, at Kennedy Krieger, a little bit about eligibility versus entitlement, just transition in general, steps to take during this transition. We're going to talk about some successful transitions to support a smooth transition, person-centered planning, a little bit about waivers, a little bit about services and adult services, and those building and the importance of relationship building. I have a picture here of a young adult who was in the Project Search program at Kennedy Krieger Institute, and this was at his internship at the International Center for Spinal Cord Injury. He's working at the center with another teammate. So who are we at Kennedy Krieger Institute? As Dawson mentioned, I am the Assistant Vice President of Neurodiversity and Community Workforce Development. At the Institute, we focus on increasing employment outcomes for individuals with disabilities and community engagement. We focus heavily on individuals during the transition age, and really working with individuals, their families, their team, their community, to really make informed decisions as they go through this process and throughout their adult life. And how do we do that? We do it through a multifaceted approach. We also look at it as a collective impact. We're in this together. There's a challenge, right? Employment for individuals with disabilities, community engagement, that's a challenge. So we want to bring partners together to work on this challenge together. We think about it as meaningful employment, meaningful community engagement. It's an economic benefit to our society, to Maryland. It's very person-centered. The journey is the person first, and it's not just one part of life. It's your living, it's employment, it's thinking about where, housing and your community engagement. And we do this through a variety of ways at Kennedy Krieger Institute. One of which is that just so you guys know, our experience is that we do have a project search program, and we are a Developmental Disabilities Administration licensed agency, and we do employment services through the Division of Rehabilitation Services. So some of the information I'm sharing today is direct experience from ourselves as an agency, what we've learned over the years, and families that we've worked with. A picture here of project search interns putting together our care bags that we gave out during our COVID-19 vaccine clinics. So I talk about this interdisciplinary approach. I think it's really crucial to understand kind of how large this team really is and the network of people that are really part of the transition team, your team when you're an adult and you are accessing services, and just all the people around to help each individual be successful. So just thinking about it, when we think about direct services, we're looking at, we say community member at our organization, not the client. You are an adult and you are part of the community. You have to think about nursing is involved. Often there's behavior psychology. You're blending school programs and adult services are coming together for this team. Maybe you're in a transition to work program. They come part of this team. Then you think about other partners that might be part of it, your resources like the Howard County Autism Society. I talk about the Maryland Center for Developmental Disabilities. You're also talking about medical partners. You might have other medical partners that are involved. Then we think about community partners. You have your community coordinator of services. You might have a support program. You've got families, caregivers. You've got the developmental disabilities. You have Division of Rehabilitation Services. And then you have the businesses, right? And the business community. So you are bringing so many people into this network, into this team to support the transition and be there throughout the process. So I'm going to go into a little bit about developmental disabilities funded services. And I really want to highlight eligibility. You have spent the majority of the last, 14, 15, 16, up to 21 years in the school system that has free and appropriate education. At this point, you're making a shift to an eligibility system. So you must qualify for services, and then funding also has to be available to be able to access those services. You're very used to going through the IEP process. As you make this shift, you're going to be shifting to a person-centered planning process, and that has goals and areas you're going to work on, and what do you need to access that? Who's going to support you to do that? And it isn't as our IEPs are very thorough, very goal-driven, a lot of accommodation-driven. It looks a little different in the person-centered planning process. And then you can attend school until the age of 21. Sometimes it can be the age of 22. And then for eligibility, you're looking at filling out that application, and then you have to be accepted into a program. So as you're thinking about these next steps, you want to think about adult service providers. When I talk about choice, applications, acceptance, that these programs can choose not to accept you. And I say not, and I do emphasize that on this slide into their program, because you are coming from a system of that free and appropriate education. And though you might really want a program, you might be really interested in that program, there is a choice, and a provider cannot accept you. And also, if it isn't working out, or once you're accepted, if either side, you or the provider program, can say this might not be a good fit, we might need to look at other options. Then you also can choose your agency, and you can also choose self-directed services. So you have a choice too. Maybe you were accepted to 2 agencies. You're going to choose one. Or you can choose to go self-directed, which is ultimately where you're the employer. So you are given your budget, you develop your budget, you can hire your staff, you can hire an agency as a vendor versus the traditional model of just accessing services through an agency. And many of you, if you've already done your application for the Developmental Disabilities Administration, and if you were determined eligible, you probably received a letter that stated that you were on the wait list as a priority category. So that means as a transitioning youth, from graduation day till 1 year from that date, you have time, that's your priority category, to come off the wait list. You have to find an agency or go the self-directed route to access those funds. And that's if those funds are available. Maryland has done a great job to have those funds available during that transitioning youth. Right now, there are over 6,000 individuals on the waiting list, and you get put on the waiting list. You can come off as a priority category, but it can take, or as a crisis resolution, but it can take years to come off that wait list. So let's talk about some of the fun stuff when it comes to transition. So what are things that you could be doing right now? When you're thinking about when you're in school, which I'm sure many of you are, and you're really thinking about this transition, you need to educate yourself. I can't stress that enough, of educating yourself on the developmental disabilities, services, eligibility process, application process, then also looking at our vocational rehabilitation services, and then our pre-employment transition services. What can you access while in school? So those pre-employment can be accessed starting at age 14. Accessing those services while in school will support that transition to adulthood. You want to complete your applications. You do want to get those applications in. You want to know if you're eligible. If you're not eligible, do you need to go through the appeal process? And to support that eligibility, you want to have time before your 21st birthday to do all of these things. You want to work on that transition plan with your transition coordinators. You want to think about goals that are going to help you increase your independence, increase your engagement with your community. So those are really key and really putting together while in school. You got to reevaluate your needs and your related services. During that transition time, so now you're really in that 1 year, last 2 years of school, really take advantage of that work-based learning opportunities. You want to have those for your resume. What about employment training programs? Project Search, Howard County has a Project Search too. I know Eliza's here. I saw her hop on. Project Access. I know there's programs with the Howard County Community College. You want to think about what are programs that are going to help me obtain employment if that's what I'm looking for, or volunteer opportunities. You want to tour, apply, and identify adult service provider agencies. Or looking at how are you going to plan your self-directed services. You should be doing that at least 2 years before graduation. And then this is a collaborative process. So you want the transition team, the adult providers, your community coordinator of service, all working together. And then you've made that transition. You're now, you've identified that adult service agency, you're moving into adult services. You want to focus on that person-centered planning that actually will happen in the last 6 months before you graduate. You want to make sure that plan is approved. You want to get that approval. You want to get your waiver packet submitted for approval. All of this should happen prior to June graduation. So I emphasize that this should all happen before you graduate in your final year of school. Then when that agency is ready and can begin those services, you will begin services. That does not mean July 1. That could mean October, November. It can mean many different timeframes depending on the agency's acceptance and process and availability. There's a picture here of a young adult who is at her volunteer site who completed a scanning project, and this was the organization celebrating that. So let's just talk about your checklist. I'm going to break it down, simplify exactly what I just kind of talked about. You are going to make sure you've applied for those DD services. You can do that at 14, 13, 15, 16. You haven't done that, do it. Go through that process. If you receive an eligibility letter, it's going to say priority category. That means you come off the wait list the year after you graduate to access services, if funding is available. You're assigned a coordinator of community services. Keep that person. Don't lose that contact. You want to make sure you have that person and you can engage with that person. You want to research, tour, you want to be part of interviews, all different agencies or staff. You want to begin that process of self-directed services, developing your job descriptions, looking for staff. And then you want to also then apply and choose. What's the process that you're going to go? What's your plan? And you could be having and applying for services with the Division of Rehabilitation while you're doing all of this. So this is just a visual to help you with the flow of how this process works. And this process really starts in December, January, while you are in your last year of school, if you are graduating at 21. If you're graduating, I want to kind of backtrack at like 19, you're graduating with a diploma, you already know you're eligible for DD services. This process isn't going to start until you're about 6 months before your 21st birthday or around 21. So that's where you want to access those DOORS services to fill that gap. So you can do this, you would do this process, whether you are accepted into a program, going self-directed, or you're not accepted into a program. So you want us to, I'm a bit of an example of what we do is we actually hold a pre-person-centered planning meeting. You will do all of this with your CCS if you have an agency or not. Then your CCS is going to submit what's called an initial PCP. Then that get approved. Then they submit your waiver. So this is a packet that you're responsible for filling out and signing. Then that has to get approved. Then if you need to revise your services, a CCS is a coordinator of community services. So from now on, I'll probably say CCS. So then you might do a revised person-centered plan. So that could be because you and an agency chose to work together in May. Now they needed to be added to your plan so that they can provide services. Maybe you chose to go self-directed. Maybe you want to revise some of the services that you're going to have. Revisions can happen at any point. That revision is submitted, then it's approved. Some agencies might do orientation meetings. Some agencies might. You might want to train your self-directed staff. Then you're going to start services. There is a 30-day review. And then you have an annual, very similar to the IEP process. So what about creating a meaningful transition? What does that mean? What are we going to do and think about? What could we be doing now? You want to think about the person-centered approach. That means you, the adult, and I know I'm saying you a lot because I'm talking to families, I'm talking to the person that's going to be transitioning. This is your journey and your life, and you've got your team around you to support you. So we want to look at this through the lens of that person-centered approach, and this person is bringing their team together to support their journey on this transition. We want to think about creating integrated settings natural supports. Who's our network? Where are the places that we go that have those built-in natural supports to increase independence? You want to focus on consistent communication with all stakeholders. That means your community coordinator of services, your doors counselor, if you have an agency identified, if you have your school transition team, if you have outside interventions or outside therapists, you want to ensure everyone's on the same page. They're all part of that team if you would like them to be. And I believe you should all be part of the processes in the meeting so everyone knows that everyone's on the same page. Plan with the school team. So much knowledge is at your fingertips with your school teams, your transition coordinators. They are experts in this. They are going to be here to be able to support you, and do it early. Do not wait until your final year of school. Utilize those pre-employment transition services. Engage in your work-based learning opportunities. You want to build partnerships outside of school. You want to think about your network. If I graduate, do I have this connection to this business where I can work, where I can volunteer? We want to use the network and then make that connection. You want to connect your agency to your network to really focus and support that employment, volunteering, independence in the community. It's collaborative. Got to be a team player. This is a community. You want to all work together. Cell phones. I know many of you might not have a cell phone. You don't want your son and daughter having a cell phone. You strongly encourage thinking about the benefits of the cell phone, even if it is just to ensure safety. Cell phones are a great tool for communication. You want to fill that gap? Door services. If you're a graduate at 19, you're ready to start looking for employment, look what you can do to access doors. Be creative and have fun. A lot of people, it's scary, and I understand that, and it's fear around transition. But if you are able to make it meaningful, do it over time, educate yourself. It can be really exciting to think about what's next when you're becoming an adult. There's a picture here of a young adult who was opening his first bank account after obtaining employment. This was a couple of years ago. He's still employed at the same place. So parents, what can you do for this transition? I'm going to stress this again. Educate yourself. Know the processes, the systems, do the research. Ask 1,000 questions. That's how I learned. I asked and I asked and I asked. It changes, right? It's fluid. Services are changing over time. How services are provided changes. So ask questions. Complete required documentation. You can't expect anyone else to complete that documentation for you. I stress that if there's parts of that packet that need to be done, you have to make sure that it gets done, and you're doing it with your son or daughter to ensure it gets completed. If an agency wants you to do their application and they want you to send them documents, do that, because they need to know that you're part of the team too. So I say this in a really nice way, but when you're moving into an adult service agency, you're becoming part of a community. So that agency knows they're going to serve not just you as the individual who's going to get services, but they're you as the parent, right? You're working together, and you want to make sure that you are a positive part of that communication, a positive part of that community, and that you're going to also follow through and be part of the team. So you want to be mindful of that, because you've been so used to maybe having to really advocate for your son or daughter. Now you want to think about your approach a little bit differently and being a collaborative in that team approach. You also want to be really honest about your needs and your son or daughter's needs. That's really important too. You want to make sure you're following through. You want to follow up. You want to make sure that you are staying on top of it. If you know that the waiver packet is due by this timeline, don't wait for somebody else to say, hey, we have to submit this. Be on top of it. Make sure that you're doing that. Keep a directory of contacts. Over time, you're going to get several CCSs, maybe several doors counselors. You're going to probably talk to different people at different agencies. Write down their name, their organization, their emails, and their role. And use email. I know sometimes you really want to call, and calling is great. I recommend emailing over calling, especially with how the environment has changed and people are working remotely. You want to support your young adult in self-advocacy and self-determination. We want to focus on their independence. We really want to help them navigate that independence. Transportation. Start thinking about public transportation, paratransit. That's where that cell phone comes for safety, right? There is a lot of great apps that you can use so that you can ensure that safety and make sure we know where everyone in the family is. And you want to make sure that person, your son or daughter, can advocate and talk about their needs, even if it is by visuals or by brief participation, that everyone should be part of the meeting. And then we talked about that team approach. So what can you do? You're in the person making this transition. You want to educate yourself too. You want to learn and be part of the discussions with the agencies that maybe you're going to be receiving services from, or the interviews for the staff as you're looking at self-directed services. You want to be part of that. You want to make sure you're building your resume. So you want to think about your work-based learning experiences. You want to think about putting together, whether it's a visual resume, a paper resume, have your experience ready. A video resume, I think the Howard County Project Search Program actually does that. You really want to think about your resume and how are you going to sell, your brand, you, as you're thinking about your volunteer or employment in that, making that transition to an adult. Want to track your experiences. So just keep track of things, your successes. I know you're doing that. So keep tracking your different experiences. You want to lead your IEP. So talk to your team and say, I'd like to lead this IEP. You want to lead your person-centered planning meetings, or you want to make sure you're part of all of these meetings. Really focus on your self-advocacy, talking about your needs, expressing your needs, and working with your team to help you express your needs and your goals, and that make sure your voice is heard in this process. No matter what your communication looks like, you want your team to help you and support you to ensure that your voice is heard as part of the process. And you want to set goals. You want to set yourself goals about what you want to do in the future and what you want to do as you're transitioning from school. So as you're thinking about setting yourself up for success, we want to think about fading our school supports. And that's when it's appropriate. Do you have a behavior plan? Have you actually had behaviors in the last year or two? Are we needing to utilize those strategies? Or have you really, at this point, you aren't currently having the behaviors that were in the behavior plan? Do we need to continue with that behavior plan? So you want to think about that as you're moving into adult services. Speech and language. Are the goals that you're working on? Am I continuing to make progress? Have I worked on the same goals for the last 2 or 3 years? You are not going to, unless you are able to access this in other ways, privately, through insurance, have that speech and language service through an adult service agency. So you want to think about fading that support in those final years of school. Same with occupational therapy, same exact what I just said. Transportation. Can you start using RTA in your last year of school? Maybe try some Ubers or Lyfts or practicing the bus. How else can I get around that isn't being driven by somebody else? And it's great to practice that with school. It's much, when you're going every day from home to the school, that's a really good routine. And that is a good stepping stone. Are you really utilizing that one-to-one aid? Some people, yes, they will have a one-to-one always, as an adult too. But is that one-to-one aid needed? Because there is going to be discussions around this in that transition to adult services. Can we begin to fade? One of the examples I always think about is there was a young adult who used assistive technology. He had a one-to-one aid, and it was around safety concern. However, when he was given the chance and the opportunity for independence, navigate a campus, he was able to do that independently. So sometimes we want to take that leap. We want to try it. We can always have support to put back in place, but we need to kind of be able to fade and try things. Because sometimes when we give that person a chance, we give you a chance to show your level of independence, we really see that people rise to that occasion. And then family mentoring. Talk to other families, talk to transition coordinators, contact me, contact Beth and Kathy. You want to talk to everyone. Meghan, make sure you're having these conversations and asking the questions. So I had mentioned person-centered planning. And this is, as I mentioned, it's a written plan of services and supports that meets your needs and goals. This is what you will be utilizing in the adult service world. And it is, your focus on you, the person being served, talks about the scope of services. You put your volunteer goals in if you are looking for competitive integrated employment, talks about independence and personal care. You have an initial plan and an annual plan. And this is completely collaborative. And all of us are responsible for implementing these goals. It's not just one person's responsibility over the other. We're all a participant on this plan. So as we mentioned, these are the Dda Medicaid waivers. So that means you have to be eligible for Medicaid. So you have to make sure you have your Medicaid eligibility to then be eligible to receive services through the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We talked briefly, you have the transition service delivery model, which is that you go through a provider agency. You have the self-directed model, which is where you are that employer, you hire your own staff, you look for agencies as a vendor, you have access to your developing your budget, based on your need. And we're going through a transformation of services. So over the next few years, this Maryland state is changing from this daily model where I think many people think about a day habilitation, 6 hours a day, to a fee for service that is more of an hourly rate, and it's focused on being in the community. So you might volunteer one day, go grab lunch with friends, and that's only about 4 hours. That's your day that your service agency is going to support you. So really want to think about that shift. And then there's 3 waivers that you could be on to access these services, which are listed here. And here's a picture of a young adult currently at his place of employment. This is not all of the services available on the Medicaid waiver services. There are many, but I just wanted to list a few, and the most common: community development services, employment, day habilitation, personal supports, respite. And I did link down here the full list of services so we can make sure that you get that as well. Just to give you some examples, when we say community development services, what could you build into your day? What does that mean? means it's community-based. Your focus and interest is volunteering. You want to work on employability skills, but you might not be sure you're ready for that paid employment. You're going to engage in your community. We're thinking about health and wellness, travel training, financial literacy. Then let's talk about employment services. If you might be, I know I want paid employment. So you're going to have discovery and exploration, job development. Maybe you do a paid job trial. And then other services, when you have obtained that job, you have ongoing job supports, follow along. At this point, you're independent. You go to work, you get check-ins. And then there is going to be an option for self-employment development too. You're eligible for services. Now you're working with an agency or your self-directed team. You really want to build positive relationships. You want to have positive communication, and communication goes both ways, agency and you. So we have to have, that ongoing communication, and we have to have open dialogue. We might not always agree on everything, right? We're not always all going to be on the same page, but we need to work together to come to a solution what's going to be best for you who's receiving and accessing services. Want to make sure that the agency is following through with their commitment and you're following through with your commitment. The agency might work on things. You also have to work on things. The agency is looking for employment with you as the individual, but you also should be working with mom, dad, aunts, uncles, grandparents for that employment as well. You want to be transparent, no secrets. You want to make sure that put all the cards on the table. Flexibility is really important. I think we really learned that in the pandemic, that flexibility, being able to work as a collaborative team go hand in hand. You got to build that trust. Everyone has to trust each other. And then we all need to have patience and allow for grace. We all know that agencies have challenges, families have challenges, but it's always important to remember we're one team, we're working together, and we have the same goals. But we want to remain positive and we want to remain, collaborative during this. And ultimately, if one party is not feeling that this is a good fit, if you chose one agency or staff for your self-directed team and it's not working, if you're not happy with what you're receiving and how your services you're getting, you can look for another agency. So that is so important to remember. The agency can also say to you, I don't think this is working. You should probably look for another agency. It's a big difference from where you are in the school system to where you're moving to. That is why having positive relationships with your entire team is so crucial. You saw Oscar earlier in the day. And when I say agency, I mean your adult service agency. It's also really important to be, have a good relationship with your employer as well. Mom and dad, I know, or grandma, or, anyone who in this room is part of that support team. I know you want to go talk to that manager, right? You want to step in. I know you have that need and that urge. Don't do it. Help your son or daughter advocate for themselves or work with the agency to support that. Want to remember, Johnny, who's employed at Royal Farms, he is the one who is the employee. He has to talk to his managers. So it's very important that we want to make sure we set those boundaries. So you saw Oscar earlier when he opened his first bank account. Here, there's a picture of Oscar when he received Employee of the Month. Oscar participated in Project Search at Kennedy Krieger Institute in his final year of school. So this was his last year. He then was accepted into Core Foundations, which is the agency at Kennedy Krieger, into our employment services. From there, he started a volunteer opportunity with a pet adoption. He became the site lead. And at that same location was a Petco and then is where he then obtained employment. He worked through the pandemic. He was furloughed for about 6 weeks, and then brought back. He followed protocols. He gets to and from work using, well, he actually can walk on most days because he's that close to his job, but he also can take public transportation. He's been there now. It's going to be, I think it just passed the 3-year mark. So, and he has a great natural support, and he is in follow along, which means he's at work independently. We check in with him every shift, and then twice a month or 4 times a month, I guess we do, we go to work and we check in on with him at work. When there has been challenges, we've worked with him and his employer to really build that relationship. And, you know, at one point he was struggling with making sure he was putting the right items in the right spot. So we built a system, and then we worked with the employer, and the whole team came together, and Oscar really led what his needs were, advocated for himself, and he continues to be successful. So I'm not going to play the video, but if you have a chance, you can listen to John's story, who also was in Project Search, and then he transitioned into, for him, it was transitioning because of the pandemic into more of a volunteer role and focusing on his love of media and podcasts. And then I put some resources here for you. So where you can actually go to better understand the DDA eligibility application, the referral form for DOORS. You have to apply for both pre-employment and VR. Information on Medicare and Medicaid services. There's a lot of DDA at a glance documents that talk about meaningful day, talk about behavior. And though they might be a little more of that like nitty gritty of like 15-minute increments or an hour, but I actually think it's really useful information to educate yourself. And then also thinking about benefits. There's a lot of places you can get benefits counseling. I just put on Full Circle because that, you know, you want to think about your SSI, and you know, you think about SSI, SSDI, and how is that going to support and or impact your plan for future employment. And then I put on here, you can scan our QR code if you want to check out more on our website. You can also email me if you have questions. I know a bunch did come through the chat, and I'm going to invite the panel to hop on too as we kind of go through those questions and any other questions you guys have. I think everyone's expertise is really crucial. And then we'll go from there. And I really appreciate and hope, you know, I know there are a lot of questions. This was, you know, very a general overview, but I hope it was really helpful as you begin this journey.
Thank you so much, Stacey. It was quite a lot of information, and I'm sure each thing you said could be a workshop by itself. So we're going to get back to questions for you, but let's go to the panel briefly. We're going to allow the panel members to introduce themselves. What is their role and their perspectives on the transition process from school to adult life, and any insights they have as they assisted youth with transition. Let's start with Kathy Land.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Kathy Land. I'm a supervisor with Service Coordination, Inc., and we are a coordination of community services providers. So Stacey had mentioned CCS a lot in the presentation. That's who we are at Service Coordination. We are one of those providers. Our role really is to support individuals with disabilities, those who have been found eligible by DDA, with support and advocacy, as well as assisting them with getting into adult services as they're transitioning from school. So we really are a large part of that team and that process to assist people with transitioning. To recap, you know, some of the, I think, really important transition points. Stacey shared a lot of information, which was great today. I have to reiterate the importance of working with the team, you know, communicating with the CCS as often as possible. You know, the CCS, until that individual is exiting school, may not be meeting with you or your child very often, but we are accessible. And so if you have questions, we encourage you to reach out. We encourage you to maintain contact and visits, with that CCS. Update us as things change with the person's life. So that way we can stay on top of those changes and we can be prepared, when we're supporting that person with exiting school. So I just want to highlight, I think how important communication is, as that piece, especially in the last year as a person's transitioning from school. There's a lot of information to go over, a lot of paperwork to complete, a lot of tough decisions to make. And the CCS is there to really support you and your child through those decisions. So we love to see the communication in that relationship. Thank you, Dawson.
Thank you, Kathy. We'll next go to Beth Benavidez.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this evening. I am a parent of a recently transitioned young adult. My son Kyle is 23, and he exited Howard County with a certificate of program completion at age 21. So we've been in the self-directed adult DDA world for the past 2 years, almost 2 years. I'm also a parent advocate with the Howard County Autism Society, and I work for the Hussman Institute for Autism. So I'm happy to help parents through this process and to answer questions as you go along. I would encourage, Stacey talked a lot tonight about agencies, and many families will choose agencies to work with. An agency might be the ARC, Humana, Kennedy Krieger, Itinerus. I mean, there's so many of them. Those are some of the big ones that we know of in Howard County, but many families also choose self-directed services. And so essentially those are funded DDA through DDA, but the individual with the disability, their family directs the services. So they determine how that person spends their day and what services that they receive. So that's also something for parents to consider. The only tips that I would offer, along with, what Stacey has provided so beautifully in her presentation, and Kathy too, is just working backwards, is really looking at where you as an individual, or where your child wants to be at 22, and then how to get there through those high school years, and really working with your team to get you there, and to just do the research yourself. You cannot depend on anyone. You wouldn't depend on somebody to tell your typical child where to go to college and when to apply and how to do that. You would figure that out yourself. And it's the same way for your child with a disability. The research responsibility is on you. So attend every one of these type of presentations you can. Anything with the word transition in it, attend it. So thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Meghan Smallwood.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meghan Smallwood. I'm a transition specialist in Howard County. I'm at River Hill and Cedar Lane, but every high school has one. I am so happy to be here to listen to Stacey's great presentation. I just want to piggyback on so many of the things she said. She really hit the nail on the head with so much of it. And research, like Beth said, is just so important, and so important to do it early. I think, one parent once said to me that I am the constant for my child after 21. I have to be the one doing all the paperwork. I have to be the one who knows which coordinator is for which service, because after 21, it's going to be me making sure I keep, maintain all of that. So just being involved in the process is just, it's so important. I can't stress that enough. And I also wanted to add too, don't be afraid to ask questions. Now is the time. No questions too silly or, too little to ask. You have a transition specialist at your school who is there to help you. You have this great, support outside of them as well. Just ask all the questions and do all the research that you can. And also, if you have other parents that that have gone through the process, don't be afraid to ask them their experience as well, because I feel like parents are the best resources since they walked in your shoes. So I'm happy to answer any questions and help you with the process.
Thank you, Meghan. And my last 2 cents worth is, in many years of working with families, don't let it fall just on you. There's a team of people that can help you out there, and that starts with your family, because this can be very stressful with all the new terms and acronyms that you go through. Okay, so let's move towards our question and answer part. As I look at the chat, I'll get to them after I open it up to our interpreter to see if there's any questions from the Spanish room. So Magda, are there any questions? Okay, great. I'll read some questions. Can we get links and emails sent to us? Yes, you'll get all the links and the presentation. Let's go. Meghan, you're the best. I wanted to make sure that was said out loud. So let's go to some of the questions that were submitted beforehand, and you can continue to put your questions in the chat box. So these questions are for the presenters.
Dawson, do you mind if I saw
Yeah.
a lot of questions about where we were talking about agency or transition age. And I just wanted to, I think Beth kind of talked about it, but transition can happen at different times for each person. So when you're thinking about transition, you might be graduating school at 18 with a diploma. You are eligible for DOORS services, maybe not DDA. So you want to map out, like Beth said, your own plan and your own what is going to get you to that goal. You also might be a graduate at 19, 20, or when you age out at 21. If you are eligible for DD services, unless you are on a waiver like family supports, crisis resolution, there are some ways to access services prior to 21. You are more than likely that priority category receiving services after 21 or after your graduation date. And so you want to backtrack about 2 years to that timeline to start thinking about what is your, 8 different ages. Are you going to go traditional route, self-directed? Are you going to looking at agencies, working with your community of your coordinator of services, CCS, working with your CCS and, working through that process. But about 6 months, you want to ensure that 6 months before, I say July 1, unless you're like a really early birthday, like August, September, and you are able to be on the waiver that year, you turn 21 versus turning 21 in February, your services would then be eligible in July. I'd say 6 to 10 months, you want to start working on that person-centered planning process. You want to get your approvals done, your waiver approved. It's not exactly, because it's a little different depending on when you graduate, but I saw a lot of questions around timeline and what does an agency mean? We really are talking about adult services who are licensed who are licensed by the Developmental Disabilities to provide those Medicaid waiver services. So we are licensed to do community development or employment. All different agencies might be licensed for different services. You might work with 2 or 3 different agencies to be able to put your plan together. So you want to keep that in mind when you're going through this process. There are over 200 agencies in the state of Maryland. Majority of them are in Central Region, which is Howard County. Howard County is in Central Region. That is the largest region with the most agencies. So I just I saw a lot of those questions, Dawson. I thought it'd be good to help kind of clarify. If there's anyone else on the panel that anything else to add to that.
No, I was just going to say, I did see a question about timelines to find out about when all these milestones should be occurring. And I know, within Howard County, the transition specialist can provide you with that as well.
And Kathy Land has already forwarded me timelines to share with
Perfect.
everybody. Magda, were there any questions from the Spanish room? Okay. Yeah, and I'll circle back to you before we finish. Okay, there was one comment in there in the chat for the panel. How has the pandemic impact timelines for transition?
I can feel that. As a CCS, we are the ones to support all of the paperwork that's required for DDA services. And so the pandemic has definitely impacted not only timelines, but also service delivery. Thankfully, over the last few months and then moving forward, those timelines and service delivery are starting to return back to quote unquote normal in terms of being able to deliver more in-person services to people. However, there is options for people to be supported virtually as well as in person. In terms of the timeline, that has been impacted in the sense that there was a lot of, transition that was happening within the system itself to adapt to being virtual. And so the ability to process paperwork, to process Medicaid applications, all of that was kind of slowed down for quite some time. So I think that we're going to be starting to get back to a kind of a more normal time frame during this transition year, but I still do see impacts in terms of what waiver and Medicaid applications being approved timely, as well as person center plans being approved timely. Just to put that out there.
I would like to add that your provider agencies, adult service agencies, they are also recovering from the pandemic and a workforce crisis. And that impact is maybe you're already eligible, you've already accessed, and you have an agency, you've already identified your agency, you guys have chosen each other, but your services might not begin for 3, 4, 6 months, from when you have ended, if you're ending school in June. So I think it's something to keep in mind, that you might not have those services right away. And that's normal in a non-pandemic timeline. But it's even more stress on agencies now who are still trying to serve those who they already serve back to what we would call normal operations. So I really think you should keep that in mind. And with the transformation of services, agencies are changing their service delivery model. So that's going to look different too. Yeah,
and what I'm learning is that the delay is also due to staffing problems. They can't find people to work in agencies. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go to the question in the chat. Is there a list of volunteer organizations who have experience working with young adults with special needs, and parentheses for self-direction?
So I wouldn't, there are online organizations that do keep national lists. And I saw Melissa take off her mute too. I don't have the names off the top of my head, but there are national organizations who keep lists of volunteer locations, employers who are inclusive in their hiring practices. But what I really suggest is getting on like your Howard County volunteer emails. I saw there were some other counties here, Montgomery County volunteer emails, seeing what opportunities, and then working to build that relationship. So it's all about relationship building. I don't know of any like just in Howard County list, but Melissa might know, or Beth might know if there's another resource out there other than these national lists.
And Melissa chimed in with the food bank, Freetown Farm, and Restore.
Yeah, we no longer have a volunteer center here in Howard County, which is a shame, but we can get you contact if you're interested in those places, and some of you all may have others, but we've had good experience with those three.
We live in Carroll County, and I have not been able to access very much. Does a person who have to live in the county that provides the service, or can I access a service that is not available in another county?
So you can access an agency provider from another county, but then the big holdup can be transportation, because many of them won't do curb to curb, depending on what their route falls. So I know, for example, a lot of parents, I've gone to tour with Living Sons Frontiers, which is in Windsor Mill, and they will do curb to curb since Howard County is within their area. But Change up in Westminster would not provide transportation, but they could still attend if someone was willing to bring them there.
And some of them have a meeting place that they want you to meet up.
If they have room on their van or transportation.
Are all agencies funded by the state?
Agencies that are considered to be licensed providers through the Developmental Disabilities Administration are funded via state funds as well as through Medicaid waiver funds. So the funding is provided through both of those sources.
My son is in a residential school and will need to transition to both meaningful day and residential services. I would be interested in any tips from the panel related to planning the transition to residential services.
I really suggest, as you're thinking about this transition to meaningful day and residential, that a lot of what we've said, to do your own research, know what's out there, work with your CCS to coordinate meetings and tours of the residential facilities as you're thinking about meaningful day. And then once you've identified and determined and choices have been made about your agencies, you want to bring everyone together to work as one team. You want to make sure that, okay, if my son is at residential, this is how is he then getting to his meaningful day? And you want everyone coming together to really be a team on that, because more things happen when you do it together. And it's the same with personal supports. Sometimes you're receiving personal supports and meaningful day from different agencies. Can there be a meetup location, right? How can you create a plan throughout the day that creates smooth transitions, ensuring that we're working on the goals in different ways, and that that each person and their needs are being met through the different agencies. The best way to do that is to meet together and collaborate. We have examples of that, especially with individuals with medical needs. We do have a lot of team in our program, at least we really want to bring those agencies together to ensure we have one plan that is across all the agencies implementing those needs, or that behavior plan, or mental health and hygiene. We want to have one plan, not 3 plans across agencies. So that's my recommendation, is bring those teams together and then make sure you're doing your research and you're touring. I think Beth said it, I said it, Kathy, Meghan, you have to really do the research. You have to be the one who's pushing this process along.
The other thing I'll add to that is timing is incredibly important when talking about accessing residential services for someone who is currently in a residential school or residential placement. Because an individual has to be eligible for one of DDA's waivers in order to receive services, it takes time to go through the application process, to go through the person-centered plan process to be eligible for the waiver. So you really have to know what's the target time frame for those residential services that your child is currently in ends, and then back out how long it might take to go through that waiver paperwork process. If a person doesn't already have benefits like SSI, we've seen it take over a year to go through the waiver process. And so, we really have to just make sure that you're working with the team, that the team understands the needs, especially for residential services. And you guys are having those conversations a year or two in advance to begin planning.
Could you please repeat what you said about likelihood of being eligible for adult services if as a minor, the student is receiving waiver services?
Sorry, Stacey, I think you're the one who answered that question.
I was just going to go back to eligibility. And if you currently are receiving services on the autism waiver, you still have to apply and be eligible to receive services through the Developmental Disabilities Administration and the 3 waivers, the community pathways, community supports, or family supports. What I did mention was that there are individuals who have been eligible and can receive waiver services on the family supports waiver prior to 21. There are also cases of crisis resolution. You graduated at 19, you can access your DDA eligible funds if funding is available, remember, prior to 21. So those are like special circumstances, crisis resolution. But as far as your eligibility goes, you have to go through the Medicaid eligibility, the application process. You have to be determined eligible for any of the waiver services you are going to access through Medicaid through the Developmental Disabilities Administration.
For students with challenging behaviors requiring behavior intervention plans in school, what does adult life look like as it relates to being eligible for services?
I would not say that behavioral needs impact eligibility, but certainly there are behavioral support services available via these adult providers that we've been talking about. It's also available under the self-directed model. So typically, if a behavioral support services are required, a behavioral plan will be created that's individualized to that person and their needs, their behaviors. And there are support services in place to help train those staff members working with the individual on that behavioral plan. And so those provider agencies are able to meet that need. And they will consider that as a factor when assessing whether or not they can support the person through their program.
I would also like to add that, you know, when you think about behavioral services and interventions and plans in the school system, it does and can be different when you're looking at how this process and how it happens in the adult service. I was an elementary special education teacher, so I do have experience with both the school and how that process goes and how it is in the adult service world. But I do really recommend, as you're thinking about how you want your services to look, do you want to be in the community? Do you want to be in a day habilitation program? Do you want volunteering? To really think about what you want, even with your behavioral needs and supports, and then finding a program that's going to be able to support you in accessing services and accessing what you want. And be mindful that if you have some significant behavioral needs, but you really want to be in your community, then it's going to be a process and a transition and flexibility. Something we've been implementing is looking at about helping individuals transition back into the community has been an hour of behavioral services with an hour of community development. So you're not out for 6 hours a day, you're working with a support behavior specialist, and you're really focusing on strategies to get back out into your community. So there's a lot of different models out there. You want to find the model that's going to be best for you.
The next one is interesting because it sounds like it's coming from a transitioning youth. When I was at Maryland School for the Blind, I was about to go to a place right from school, but I told Dad no, but I'm in it now and cannot be happy. It's not a question, but I'm just wondering.
That actually came from me.
It did?
Yeah, because I graduated in 2003, and the one mistake I regret to this day is I turned DDA down directly. And it took me forever to get back up to the residential. So one thing I always tell people is, I caution them, once DDA offers you a service, if you're eligible, do not tell them no. Because you may not get another bite at the apple, so to speak.
Wow, I see self-advocacy skills here that I might be employing later on. Thank you very much for speaking up.
No problem.
Okay, it seems to me that the selection of the agency is very important. do they end up providing the service, or do they help in coordinate and planning the service, which are provided by someone else? I am struggling with the strategy one should use in selecting the right team. We are very early on in the process, so not sure if the question makes sense. All questions make sense. Anybody want to try that?
Sure. So I would say there's a couple answers, I think, to your question. The agency, as we're calling an agency, is a licensed provider agency through DDA. They are the ones who will actually be providing the services to the person with disabilities, or the person can contract with that program through self-directed services to receive those services. The person who assists with coordinating and planning the services, I think most likely is the CCS, or Coordinator of Community Services, that you're referring to. They're the ones whose role is to support your child, you, the team through that transition process, to help you understand what the choices are, what the services are that are available, who the providers are that provide those services, and help to guide you through that paperwork process to make sure that everything is submitted timely and that services can begin. So there's two different parts of that team that we're referring to.
And I think it really is about that team. I've said that a lot, working together. And when the team is in collaboration, working through each process and are all informed, we all want to be on the same page. We want to make sure we're providing the same information. It's going to help you move through this process. And I've seen that success with many of the person-centered planning teams that we work with, or I've worked with in other programs providing support. So yeah, the agency, yes, provides that service, but you as the team also are contributors as well. When we think about employment, we want to pull our networks and our resources. Maybe as the agency, we're applying to 4 programs a week, but at home, you're doing 3 programs. You're supporting your son or daughter in that application. Maybe you're helping with looking for apartments. We all want to be part of that team and doing it together, but the funded services are provided through the agency, but we want to think about how can we do this collectively.
What happens if we move out of Maryland? Does a family have to apply in the new geography separately? Contemplating how an IEP is a legal document that can be implemented anywhere in the US, and trying to understand the context for post-high school services / supports.
Laura, you asked one of my favorite questions of all time. I only wish that we had a system across the United States so that when you transition or move to another state, that services can continue to be accessed. Unfortunately, you have to begin the entire process over again. You will need to complete the application, you have to be determined eligible, and states, it's different. How service delivery looks, the amount of funding, the programs, it looks different. I hope one day we are in a different place. I do a lot of advocacy on this and policy on a federal level. I really hope that that's not the case, but if you are considering moving, you really need to look at that state, their process, and you want to begin that process. And not all states have self-directed. That is not an option in all states either. So it's a heavy question. And one day, hopefully, our answer will change.
I've gotten that question a lot from parents who are planning retirement after their child or young adult is turning 21 and want to go to California. And, we're disappointed to find out that they'd have to start over. And I also, families who are in the military who don't know where they're going to end up at 21. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
I will add, if you are getting a lot of questions, Megan, about Florida has a very different funding model, and it is much more difficult to obtain and have those services in Florida. Like where we have this priority category, that doesn't exist in Florida. But then there's states like Oregon where there's no wait list. So again, it's very different. I definitely caution Florida because of the way you obtain funding. This priority category is giving you that 1 year you, just like Matt said, you really want to take advantage of that year when you were coming off the wait list. You don't want to miss it. So if you are 20 and you have not submitted your application to DDA, you want to do that. You want to make sure you have that eligibility, because if you do it at 22, you are just on the wait list. I know people that without that crisis resolution, it's 3 years, they're still waiting to come off that wait list. So you don't want to miss this opportunity.
Yeah, I hear a lot of families thinking Delaware because of the taxes might be a better choice, but you got to weigh your pros and cons.
Again, research.
Yeah.
How do we set up a school program with a balance of academics to keep my child learning while making sure she's able to gain life skills?
Dawson, can you repeat that one more time?
How do we set up a school program with a balance of academics to keep her learning while making sure she's able to gain life skills?
So I always say everyone is individualized, right? Everyone is different. And you want to think about what is going to best benefit me or your son or daughter as I move into adulthood. Is the academics currently what I'm going to need and access to be successful in my adult life, or is it work-based learning? So it's hard to say and make that decision without knowing all the specifics about each person, which is why you have Meghan, your transition coordinator, and others to talk through that. But it kind of goes back to what I was talking about, those feeding the supports and planning out what is going to benefit you for the next phase versus you have to do academics, you have to do the diploma, where is the work-based learning going to help you obtain that job in the future, help you access your community and live independently? So you got to weigh your pros and cons.
I think back mapping is so important to knowing when the exit year is, if they're exiting at 21, and kind of going backwards to see how many years they're going to have. And if academics are important, trying to plan time for that and seeing how much time they have for a work-based program, or project search, any of the programs we offer. If you're on the diploma track, I think trying to find time, if they're interested in a certain career academy, to fit that in the schedule, or the tutorial classes to work on advocacy skills. So it is very individualized, but I think just planning out that time and sitting with your transition specialist or your IEP team and figuring out what life skills are important to fit in there would help.
What strategies would you suggest for high-performing students on the spectrum who may not be getting what they need from a non-public or a public school in terms of instruction?
Sorry, Dawson, I was reading the question in the chat. Can you repeat your question? I was reading that long one that came in.
It was about services in school for a parent who feels their child is high performing and on the spectrum, and how would they advocate for themselves to get what they need from the school system?
Yeah, if you're talking about, you want to work with your son or daughter on that advocacy and be able to, maybe it is calling an IEP meeting and then giving the opportunity for your son or daughter to be able to share about their needs and supports, or what they're looking for to change goals in their plan. So working and supporting your son or daughter, sorry, it is getting to be 8:30. And on that is the best thing you can do. Practicing, talking through, not talking for, but talking through giving options, giving examples, plain language, being thorough, and then helping that your son or daughter talk through that advocacy. I love, Meghan, their tutorials. There's also People on the Go in Maryland, which is a self-advocacy group that does meetups every Friday, and they talk and train on many, Matt, on many of these
Vice Chair and we're set to meet up again. If you want those dates, I can shoot them to you. So You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. There's so many options. And I
Come on.
know, you've got Howard County Autism Society, you've got Parents Place in Maryland that really can provide, advocacy and support for that training.
Well, we're at 8:30. Why don't we finish with the last question in the chat? Our son has multiple disabilities and is very dependent on us, parents. We will get guardianship for him. Can the panel comment and confirm that the different teams which will work with us after our son is 21 will respect that legal guardianship and include us in all discussions, decisions, and not insist on including the son who might be incapable of making decisions? I've heard that parents sometimes get sidelined. Please comment.
So what
As a
I'll
legal
say
guardian,
is, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Beth.
no, I mean, as legal guardian, you do make all decisions for your child. That is what a guardian is, and a legal guardian is. So you have to be included. There's nothing that your son could sign on his own behalf. And if that is something that that you'll be having, and when you're meeting with anyone that is providing services for your son, you would make that very clear in any discussions, that you are a guardian and that you would be the decision maker.
Beth, before you leave, can you respond to the question specifically to you? What, if anything, surprised you when you transitioned your son out of the school and into adult services?
I think, what surprised me was that there were a lot of possibilities. And for anybody on here, and I know a lot of parents that are on here, you guys know me, I am a researcher. I'm somebody that likes to dig deep into what the services are. And so I did sit with Appendix C, and Appendix C is that list of services that DDA provides under the waiver, the Community Pathways Waiver. And so I wanted to know what was possible, what could be funded, what were all the services that could be provided. And I was really surprised to see that there were so many things that could support Kyle in his day. Since Kyle's left high school, he's been his happiest ever. And his days are truly person-centered. They are around him from the minute he wakes up until the minute he goes to bed. He makes the decisions on his day. With my support, we put those decisions into place. So what his community supports are, who is working with him, what agency he uses. And I think that's the key, is really being really centered on your child. If the last thing I want to say is, if you haven't already attended Charting the Life course, it is the course, the webinar that DDA puts on by their Family Supports Office, and it is phenomenal. And the reason why is because it really makes you start to think differently about your adult child, your adult that you're supporting, and really how to be focused on them first and foremost, and the natural supports that are already around them and in their life, and how to create this good life for them, what that looks like. And so it surprised me by how much I learned from that, and how my own thinking changed, and how everything really truly in the adult world becomes centered on that person and what is best for that person. So I would just say there's a lot of possibilities out there. And we hear every parent, it's like dropping off the cliff and the bus stops and this and that. And really, if you do your research early, and I know many of you here are still a couple years out, ask the questions, attend every transition seminar you can. It's not as scary as you think it is. And it's not as bad as you think it is. It's actually quite good. There is a lot of support out there to be had. It's just different. It's not handed to you by the school system. It's not the school system telling you what they're offering you. It's you having to go out there and find what's available, and make that work for your child. So I'm always happy to talk with parents through the process as well. I think just be open to it. And like everyone here has said, ask lots of questions.
Wow, it's a no-brainer having these panelists and guest speaker tonight, I can tell you that. So it's after 8:30. Are there any questions people might have before we jump off? I'm looking at the chat box. So,
Dawson, can I also just add, parents, so that you know, the DDA is coming along and by leaps and bounds in the communication that parents are receiving today. So, all of you are going to have it so much better than I had it, and the parents before me, I had it better than they did. DDA is doing recorded webinars. They're on their website. They're doing tip sheets. They're doing Q&A sessions. So take advantage of their recordings, because DDA is the one you want to get your information from. They're the source of the funding. So, really check out their website and what they have to say. Keep an eye on our Howard County Autism Society webpage under Special Ed Resources Transitions. We're constantly updating that as well. But DDA is a great resource.
Magda, are there any questions from the Spanish room?
Yeah, Beth, can you hear us? We can't hear.
No, I can hear you now.
Okay, well, now we can't,
can
you're
hear
very soft,
you.
but Magda is asking, you mentioned a seminar, I think it was the Charting the Life course. And
Yep, that's
that
offered by
actually is
DDA.
available in Spanish. I put the link in the chat. Magna, I'm gonna send it to you too. If you click on that, you can access the tools. That's not the DDA site though, Beth. That's the Nexus site that Marianne gave us, but it does have tools in Spanish. Do you remember that one? Is there another? What else should we be putting in there to share?
I'll look for the link to be, or maybe we can send
We
everybody
can
the
send
link.
it around. Yep. We can
To
send it around.
Marianne's family support. She does a monthly, I think it's every month. She has a family supports
Okay.
webinar. I'm presenting next at the end of the month in one. It's on transition. So I think, yeah, reaching out. We'll have to. I'll get with Marianne and find out where her list of when the next Charting the Life course is going to be, and then maybe you could send that to everybody that's registered, Melissa.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just want to remind people the webinar will be recorded and the handouts will be posted on the autism website. Let me take one last opportunity to again thank Kathy, Megan, Beth, and Stacey for coming tonight, and everyone for being here.